was the sort of hint, I suppose, of the beginning of a gardening life when we moved to what was our first married home, a Thames sailing barge. A magnificent beast of a boat. I'm sure some of you know what they look like. 80 foot, a double-hulled, incredible great mast, which was a solid tree. And my mother came to visit, and having industriously cleared away all the garbage from the side of the River Thames, you know, all the sort of stuff that floats up there, planted flag iris, primroses along the bank, Welsh daffodils. She even bought a beautiful rose, I think it was probably Gallica complicata, and trained it out on the railings that separated the towpath from the paddock behind. But come the first winter, the Thames did its great roaring winter thing. All the flag irises got sort of tossed away in the flood. Come spring, all the people out on their perambulations picked all her daffodils and all the primroses, and then come summer, the horses ate the rose. So that was the end of that particular garden. And she said rather hopefully, perhaps some pots on deck, but my husband, who is deeply nautical, said definitely no pots on deck. He didn't even allow a netting to go round to save our small daughter from falling overboard. Instead, she was tethered by one of those old-fashioned leather harnesses. Do you remember what they looked like? And a piece of rope was tied onto the mast, measured carefully just to the edge of the boat to encourage the sense of adventure, but just to stop her going over the edge. So, no pots. But we did then actually, finally, with the arrival of another child, inevitably have to leave this magnificent boat. We had a passing out party when all the friends from the BBC late night lineup where I was then working rowed themselves down the river at dawn, and we said goodbye to the boat and started an altogether more tidy life, West Sussex, where, although I didn't know it, I inherited actually rather a good cottage garden. I also inherited a magnificent neighbour, one of those fabulous spinsters whom you should have interviewed, Jo Schwabe, left over after the First World War, superb gardener. And when I went out sort of in the first week to survey the patch, I was standing with a fork over a very, very narrow border underneath the sitting room window. Suddenly, the windows of the neighbouring cottage flung open. Don't touch that border! And I thought, oh, perhaps this isn't mine after all. I thought it probably was. And this woman came striding round and said, there's Madonna lilies in that border. You'll ruin them with that fork if you dig there. And so sort of she became, after that first rather alarming encounter, the most amazing teacher. A really fantastic gardener. Because, of course, there in West Sussex, I was a long way away from my own parents. And that is something that actually is a problem. In the old days, one absorbed so much information about child rearing, about all the things one needed to know, running a house and gardening from your parents. But they weren't close enough for that to happen. Another problem also was associated with my parents, that they actually gardened in South Wales on acid soil. The old Hillier's Manual of Trees and Shrubs in its green paper cover was their absolute Bible. And so, all marked up in my father's schoolmasterly hand with things that had thrived, a lot more things that had died. But Hillier's Manual of Trees and Shrubs was what I thought everybody had to have. So I bought it, and I ordered rhododendrons, not, of course, realising that in Sussex, clay was not what rhododendrons was going to like. I only killed 3 before I thought, something's going on here, and finally learned that actually soils do matter. And the soil that I grew up with was not the soil that I had. But I did actually get tremendously sort of involved in the process of growing at that place, thanks to Jo Schwabe, and learned how to care for the lovely things that I had been given. It is a great gift to a new gardener to actually move into a place that has been well gardened, well thought out, and full of things that are most likely not to die. That was the great thing about cottage gardens. They weren't filled with miffy plants. They were things that did their stuff, paid their rent, and looked good at the right time. But I also there actually started to grow fruit and vegetables, which later became a complete, overwhelming passion. It was a little corner of the field over a far side of a brick wall. Partly I started it as a way of escape. For the first time, shut up with young children, all working mothers, I mean mothers that have had a working life beforehand, find this tremendous sense of overwhelming claustrophobia. And when a terrible sort of confrontation seemed to loom, of the sort that had no resolution except giving the children away to the first person that came down the lane, I used to leap over that wall, furiously hoe beans, and actually it was just usually 2 minutes before one of the children caught up with me and scrambled over the wall herself. It was a way of just getting that moment of peace that sometimes is all that you actually desire. But on that good, solid Sussex clay, I grew the best sprouts that I've ever grown in my life. So memorable for the sprouts, but also then, that was the 70s, and you remember how weird the 70s were. All sorts of things kept disappearing, things you really needed. And of course, oil went on the first of its great price hikes. And I suddenly got this feeling I have to be somewhere where I can feed us, the children, have some food left over for barter, have firewood and some chickens. And this idea grew. I wasn't sort of into self-sufficiency in the sort of whole weave your own shoes way, but I just wanted more space. And completely on a whim, we went to Dorset, which I adored. And we acquired the sort of house, you know, that now sounds all right, a Queen Anne Rectory. And it was a wonderful place, and it completely, for the next 40 years, took over our lives. But it didn't have a roof, and there wasn't actually any room inside that had a complete floor or ceiling. And when the health visitor came to call, we were sort of at the stage of just having had yet another baby, how often that goes with moving. And she found me crouched in front of the scullery fire, feeding this child, sort of surrounded by debris from the collapsed ceiling, ivy growing up the insides of the walls as well as the out. She said not a word. I gave her full marks. There was a great fire going in the grate. And she obviously thought, okay, let's just sort of wait and see how this one goes. That was a fantastic 40 years in many ways, because that house sort of, in the way that some houses do, completely possessed us. Gradually we got a bit of a roof on, we lived, you know, sort of in one bit at a time. But mostly, of course, what I was doing was realising that outside there was this amazing kitchen garden, completely obscured when we bought the place. It took us 18 months to actually find our boundaries in that place. We just hacked away, and when we came to a stone wall, we thought, oh, well, that must be it. And we hacked away into another bit that then became known as the top lawn. And I was standing up there one day looking at hounds hunting in the valley below, and there was a sort of scuffling noise from the next door field, and the farmer said, I ain't seen nobody there since the last war. I didn't dare ask which war he was referring to, but it was very forgotten in that way. But golly, what a garden that was. In terms of the kitchen garden loan that went down to Australia. And I had this sort of dream of somehow people walking into the place and not thinking that anything had ever happened there, that this, they would think, was how it had always been. That's what I wanted, not to impose myself on the place, but to release that place, to find again, as we did find, those paths that divided the kitchen garden into its 9 17th century squares, to line all those walls with peaches and nectarines and gages and pears and all the things that I adored to grow. And in fact, after the end of 40 years, I was growing in that kitchen garden every single fruit and vegetable that actually could be grown outside. And then there was that time when our children somehow had grown up. And I don't know quite, as no mother ever knows, where all those years went. Those years of making potions and hiding in the shrubbery and trading dares and secrets and riding on trunk horses and all those sort of strange things that go on with the inventive games, suddenly transformed into the vision of 2 of these girls at different stages walking up the lane to a church decorated with cow parsley and apple blossom and getting married. Strange, complete sort of spectrum of childhood lived in that one place. And of course, when they'd gone, all this food production seemed not quite so necessary anymore, and all sorts of other things impinge as you get older anyway. And so we decided to go. And there was that sort of long period of decision and the moving day fixed. And I knew it was the right thing to do. And what could be done once could be done again. I told myself again and again. It became a mantra, but that last day I wobbled so badly. It happened to be a most perfect May day, and the sun was shining onto the border outside the study that I'd looked at so often when I was trying to work up my gardening pieces for the Independent, and the royal ferns were silhouetted against the light in that way that just made them look so magically fantastic. And suddenly I just wanted to scoop up the entire place and take it with me. And then right at the end, my husband broke open the champagne that he had foresawn that we would need, and we toasted the past, toasted the present, and I laid my cheek against the moss of that courtyard near the wall where so many dinner parties had taken place. And I thanked the garden for everything that I'd learned from it. And then we walked away, leaving it blazing in the June sunshine. Thank you very much. Thank you.